Hi again, everybody. Ken Phelps here from the Daytona Regional Chamber of Commerce. Welcome to our program, Virtual Learning. Reinforce your brand, accelerate your recovery. I think something that we're all thinking about as the most recent days and weeks are passing, and we've started phase one of the reopening. So as usual, some housekeeping items to go over real quick. Double check that your microphones are muted to help everybody hear clearly. If you have a question or comment during today's program, we ask you to use the chat function to take care of that. If you mouse over the screen, you'll see that the control panel will pop up in your Zoom window, and you can go ahead and click on the chat button now. It will open that window and allow you to ask your questions or make your comments. If you miss something, we are recording today's session, so that will be uploaded as soon as possible after we're done, and will be shared on the Daytona Regional Chamber of Commerce YouTube channel, as well as on our COVID-19 resource page. So those will be available afterwards if there's anything you need to go back and you want to re-listen to, or a point you may have missed. With that said, it's my pleasure to introduce our panelists for today. We've got a great group for you. Leading off will be Jeannette Duerr. Jeannette is one of the most experienced and respected communications professionals. Clearly, I'm not in her league with not being able to speak in our community. She's best known locally for serving years as Vice President of Marketing and Communications for Synergy Billing, but has decades of public relations experience. She's one of a small number of PR professionals nationally that is accredited in public relations, has received numerous awards for effective communications programs, is a past president of the Volusia Flagler chapter of the Florida Public Relations Association, and a board member of the statewide Florida Public Relations Association. She was a member of Leadership Daytona, Class 39, the Fine 39. She is proud of that. And she was named a Woman of Influence in Business by the Volusia Flagler Business Report in 2017. Up next is Kevin Hayworth. Kevin is the co-owner and COO of Hayworth PR in Ormond Beach, and he is a Daytona Beach native. Hayworth PR specializes in the travel and tourism industry, representing hotels, resorts, destinations, attractions throughout the Southeast and the Caribbean. They've been a member of the Daytona Regional Chamber of Commerce for more than 20 years, and we thank them very much for that ongoing support. And last but certainly not least on our panel is Michael Jiloty. Mike's a longtime marketing specialist in Central Florida. He is a graduate of Leadership Florida and is principal writer of Volusia County Economic Development Quarterly. His portfolio includes numerous award-winning advertising, marketing, and public relations campaigns. We thank them all for spending some time with us this morning to talk about brand, how it has an impact on your business, and how you're able to use that to kind of begin to recover from this kind of unprecedented situation we've been in. So as we start, Jeannette, why don't you lead us off, and let's start with some of the baseline to make sure everybody's all kind of playing from the same song sheet, so to speak. What is a brand?
Well, thanks, Ken, and thanks to everybody who's joining us this morning. We hope this is helpful for you. The bottom line is your brand is what differentiates you from your competition. It's the picture that consumers have when they think of your company. It helps them make decisions about which company they are going to, from which one they're going to buy. One of the other things that it does is it helps your employee pride and satisfaction improve or maintain. When I work with clients, when we're talking about their brand, I ask them to think about, why are we here? Where are we going? What principles guide us? And the answers to those questions feed your brand. But ultimately, you need to share that information through an action, which is branding.
That's very good. All right. Well, let's let Kevin take that next piece then and talk a little bit about that. So Jeannette explained what a brand is. Kevin, what is branding? How do you differentiate between the two?
Sure. I like to think of it, the brand is the sum total of how your customers perceive your business, whereas branding is about how you shape that perception. So if the brand is literally anything that leaves a mental image of your business or your company identity, then branding is literally anything that can shape that mental image, the picture that Jeanette was talking about. Branding includes the creation of the brand itself, the things that most people normally associate with the brand. That's the company name, the logo, the slogan. And that is obviously influenced over time by a lot of outside factors beyond your control of people, culture, the news. But active branding is what we all do to nurture that brand over time. And those are the images, the messages, the promises that we push out to our customers via advertising and marketing and PR. It is the process of defining and, if as needed, redefining your brand personality. And in the broadest sense, and branding is a very broad topic, you could consider it to be the total of all your customer experiences. Now, during a crisis like this pandemic, even the biggest, most successful brands in the world have taken time to pause and kind of reevaluate their brand and their marketing to make sure that they are still relevant and insensitive. And we've pulled some examples of these huge mega brands that are actually leveraging their equity of their logo, their brand identity, to kind of help through public service announcements. And here you can see the golden arches that have been, for the first time ever, split apart to create some room. You've got Chiquita Banana showing that Chiquita herself has opted to stay home and stay safe. Pizza Hut, encouraging people to pizza home. And that's a brand that relies heavily on dine-in business. And then you've got these three major manufacturers, auto manufacturers, Volkswagen, Mercedes, and Audi, that have altered their otherwise untouchable logos to literally spread out and create some space. And we're not all so fortunate to have decades worth of brand equity built up in our logos and virtually unlimited marketing budgets, but these are we thought, some pretty entertaining examples of how to utilize that logo under certain circumstances.
Kevin, I thought when we talked a little bit about this with the panel as we were planning for this, the thing that I think impressed me most about this adjustment by these major corporations is that there's still no doubt about which company you're talking about. The brand is so strong that they've adjusted, but you still know exactly who it is.
Absolutely, which each of these logos and the brands themselves have behind them what they call brand Bibles. I can't imagine how many pages they are, but they dictate color choices and font sizes and all the allowable combinations. So this really is an exceptional situation and a particular extraordinary circumstances that they've allowed their logos to be utilized this way, but absolutely unmistakable logos there.
All right. Well, we've talked about some examples of what brand and what branding is. Let's bring Mike into the conversation a little bit. Mike, so as businesses are now kind of trying to navigate this and they're starting to focus on recovery and what their next steps might be, what are some of the positive things that they can be doing now to reinforce their brand in an effort to accelerate their recovery post-crisis?
Thanks, Ken. I think, as it says on the first bullet point here, focus on the future. I think that our customers, our clients, look to us to be solid, stable, and to be a resource that's waiting for them when they're ready to ramp up again. I think bullet point number 1 represents the idea of hope, which is critical in life and critical in business. And I think that's why, at least in my situation, I've always wondered, do I like receivables better or do I like cash better? And I think I like receivables better because it represents hope and it represents, work in the pipeline and all that sort of thing. So you do want to focus on the future. In terms of communication, communication is absolutely vital at all times, but particularly in a time of uncertainty like this. I think you need to be a good communicator, proactive communicator. When in doubt, communicate. And the idea of communicating both internally and externally is vital. You need to talk to your customers, but as Jeannette alluded to earlier, you also want to be addressing your staff, your vendors, your suppliers, and so forth. So communication is critical. I do think that you want to examine your messaging. And I think what I mean by that is you want to channel your customer, channel your client, get into his or her head and try to imagine what he or she is thinking about, what he or she is worried about, what he or she is hoping for. So that's what I mean by examine your messaging. You do not want to, you want to provide genuine value to your customers or your clients. This is not a time for tricks, no bait and switch. Either offer something that has a dollar value or something that has even more value in terms of helping your clients or customers with strategy and getting to the next step. I represent a few clients who are running political campaigns, and I always tell them that while the voters are the only thing that we're thinking about, the voters, I mean, the candidates are the last thing that the voters are thinking about. It's too early, it's not political season. So, it's important to channel the person you're trying to reach and think about what his or her concerns are.
And I think I wanted to go back to examine your messaging. As we were working on this, Kevin had some real insights about the differences between where we were a month ago and where we even are this week in terms of our messaging. You want to tell us more about that, Kevin?
Well, just that there's such a rapidly changing situation, and I think we'll talk about a little bit further on, but that you have to be aware of changing circumstances and be willing and able to adjust to those. What we were helping some of our clients communicate to their customers 2 weeks ago, even we've had to change those messages. The pandemic, everybody, it's just such a huge learning curve, and everybody's doing the best they can. But it's important to be comforting and give that sense of hope, like Mike talked about. But we've reached a point where it feels like the public has turned a corner, and they want to be, while they appreciate a lot of the offers, the relief that's being offered by car dealerships and insurance companies and banks and everybody else, people want to get on with things. So the message that we're all in this together, the compassionate message, while it's certainly appreciated, people are getting the sense that they've seen enough of that now. It's like we appreciate that. Now what can we do all together to take that next step, both as businesses and consumers?
Well, I think part of that gets into solving the problem. And Jeanette, that was one of your really hot button kind of points as we were planning this, is people need to know that as a business, you've got some way to help them.
Well, in fact, and that's true in any time. A good product or service is helping the customer solve a problem. And many times the most effective marketing we can do is to say, here, we've got this problem solved for you. And again, as we said earlier, good communications practices are timeless for both internal and external customers. But it's especially important to think about those things right now when when we're in the middle of a crisis like this. And there are some other things that we feel people should keep in mind. Be relevant. If you are not in the middle of the crisis yourself, your organization, then really think about whether the messages and the outreach you're doing to customers or potential customers is relevant to what everybody's experience is right now. Be authentic. Don't force something. Don't push yourself into the pandemic response if that's not authentic to who you are, and if it's not something that that really works for you. And you see a picture here of Jenny and Jeremy Craig with their two little girls, and a police officer from Cocoa Beach who was coming with her dog, coming to Copper Bottom Craft Distillery to get hand sanitizer. And I think most of us in this market are familiar with this. Jenny and Jeremy retooled their entire, well, not their entire, they're still making rum and vodka, but they retooled their production capacity. And I believe they've now made 45,000 containers of hand sanitizer. They have been, so that is solving a problem, because especially initially during this pandemic, people couldn't find hand sanitizer anywhere, not even first responders and healthcare workers, let alone those of us who just want to go safely in and out to the grocery store or bring up our trash cans. So they solved a problem. They were relevant. What could have been more relevant to the situation we're facing than producing something that everybody needs? They're authentic. If you know the Craigs and you know their distillery practice and their own personal lives, this was very authentic to them. They are deeply involved in the community. Jenny's the immediate past president of the Holly Hill Chamber, and they have continued throughout this time to have weekly Facebook Live. They're not productions, they're visits with us. They're entertaining. The two of them are naturals on camera, including their little girls. I have pictures of Carmen pasting labels on hand sanitizer bottles. And first of all, I think nearly everyone in the community who follows these things is familiar with what they're doing. They receive coverage first locally and then nationally on television for what they are doing. And although some other distilleries across the nation are doing this, all of the elements that we're talking about combined to make Jenny and Jeremy's efforts just really attractive and a compelling story and a cute story and a feel-good story for media across the country. So this is an example of just a wonderful way to reinforce their brand. And now people are coming by to pick up hand sanitizer and, oh, by the way, buying a couple of bottles of rum and vodka. But the best thing about Jenny and Jeremy is that's never been an issue in this whole thing. It's always been, you just come by here between noon and 4 and we'll have hand sanitizer for you. They've had visits from a Navy ship up in Jacksonville, from folks all over Florida, and they have met that need. And so it's been a real success story and a perfect example of all the elements you can use to make a good pandemic story.
Jeanette, am I correct that they are giving away the hand sanitizer?
Absolutely. They have not taken $1 for hand sanitizer. They do have a place where you can contribute. Originally, people were contributing. I mean, they need tons of sugar. They needed plastic bottles. They needed labels, which Embry-Riddle provided for them. So, and then there's a place to contribute on their Facebook page, which many of us have done just to support them. But they've never sold one bottle of hand sanitizer. And they have a drive-up, no-touch delivery system as well.
Right. And Mike, I think that you can see, based on the reaction to that story, that authenticity resonates with people and that will growth. And it really goes back to your thoughts on focus on the future and the rest of the bullet points we've got there. They're all forward-looking. And so this doesn't have to be a, hey, I developed the next great marketing idea. It can just be stuff that you're doing if you do it well. Am I interpreting that correctly?
Yeah, I think the idea of being relevant is critical. And to Kevin's point about the fact that this whole situation has evolved a great deal in the last month, but I mean, even week by week, the terrain has changed quite a bit. So you want your messaging to be current to the moment. And you do want it to be authentic. And I think Jeanette's example from Copper Bottom Distillery, you just couldn't get more authentic. They just decided to do this one day, and the next day they were in the business of creating hand sanitizer of all things. And as Jeanette said, Embry-Riddle stepped up and donated labels, and other businesses donated bottles. And from what I understand, just ordinary customers or prospective customers donated hundreds of pounds of sugar. Yeah. Because the Craigs said that as long as they have the materials, they'll keep making hand sanitizer, which is pretty heroic. And fortunately for them, visitors would purchase their product while they're in the store. So they've made a lot of new friends and a lot of new allies. Other things that this particular slide addresses. The third bullet point, of course, is to keep on marketing if possible. Of course, some disciplines of marketing cost money, others do not, but anything you can do to keep the name and the brand out there is critically important. And of course, that almost certainly is going to involve retooling your marketing budget so that you're doing the most important things that you can afford first, and the other things come later. There may be new ways to generate revenue. I think that the Craig's example is great. They were putting their customers first and putting the community first, but as it turned out, they've sold a fair amount of product from people who've dropped in. So they did get some donations to help them continue with the hand sanitizers, but they've also sold some product, which has helped as well. So they were not at all freaking out as this process proceeded. You do, of course, want to focus on your existing customers, because as you ramp back up, the existing customer base can be the lifeline that keeps you solid until you get new customers. And of course, being helpful to current customers and new customers is very important. And you do need to be flexible. It's no time for rigidity. All the rules are gone and have changed. So you want to kind of go with the tide.
Good. Kevin, let's talk about, we've talked about here's some positive things you can do. What are the pitfalls people need to avoid in terms of moving forward with their branding efforts at the moment?
Sure. Well, we've mentioned a lot of things, like you said, that people could be doing, and any one of those things would be better than doing nothing. Unfortunately, for a lot of different reasons, there are a lot of businesses who have just kind of resigned themselves to sitting back, and I can understand that, waiting to see where things are going, and just planning on picking up the pieces when things get back to some kind of normal. But a lot of them are fighting back and changing their strategies, and the Copper Bottom, again, a great example of that. But looking for ways to adapt to the changing circumstances, and hoping and improving their chances of coming out in a better shape. But as Mike was saying before, focus on the future, keep marketing if you can afford it, look for ways to adapt to the new reality, and then start preparing for that recovery. The other point we've got here has to do with PR stunts, publicity stunts. Probably not a real good idea right now. They're very popular among a lot of the major brands, big brands around the world. They can be very impactful when done properly. They can also have an equally big negative impact, though, if it's poorly timed or in bad taste. For example, most publicity stunts obviously involve exposure to large crowds, which is neither a good idea nor even possible in some places right now. They can be expensive, they can be complicated logistically. So for now, we're advising just put the PR stunts on the shelf for another time. And this next bullet has to do, kind of goes back to the messaging again. Don't try to capitalize on this crisis. There's a lot of political opportunists that are using the pandemic to push their own agendas, but don't be one of those businesses out there that are trying to make money off of consumers' legitimate fears and concerns. You've seen price gouging, some profiteering, but even if it's not technically illegal, the damage from doing things like that could be, the damage to your brand can far outweigh any short-term gain. Same thing as far as being insensitive. Be careful that you're not coming across as insensitive, even unintentionally. If you have scheduled content on Facebook or some other platform, or if you're in the middle of a otherwise perfectly legitimate advertising or marketing campaign, take a second to check those messages. Make sure that you're not going to look insensitive to the situation if those things go out. If you've already purchased ad space, rather than pull the plug on it, see if there's just some way that maybe you can retool your message to something that doesn't make you look so tone deaf. Case in point, I was joking about that if you're, you might not want to tell consumers your product is finger looking good during a crisis that advises you not to touch anything, particularly your face. Or if you're running ads that feature large groups of people having a great time in a social setting, that's probably not going to come across real well right now. And lastly, don't focus on driving sales right now necessarily. Focus on making connections. If your customers already know you as a somewhat aggressive marketer, they'll probably be a little more forgiving. But this goes back to being real and authentic. You know, just be human, show some heart, and try to make real connections with customers who are looking to you for solutions, because those connections will pay off more in the long run, particularly during tough times like these. And I think, Mike, you had a couple of other things not to do that you had mentioned before, right?
Well, I think you covered it very well, Kevin, but I do want to underscore what you said about not focusing on sales. I think it's very important right now to pivot, to try to focus on the concerns of your customers, of your clients. I know that some hotels, for example, who lost all of their bookings, opened up then to host healthcare workers and first responders and so forth. And I think that's a good example of what you said relative to focusing on the customer and the community rather than sales.
Right. I think from my perspective personally, as well as I know in talking with a lot of my colleagues here at the Daytona Regional Chamber, the companies that are doing well are the ones that have strong relationships. And you talk about the synergies that are built between folks like Copper Bottom and Embry-Riddle. And to me, it's one of the things that makes this such a great community and why so many brands in this area are strong, because they're authentic in what they're doing and doing the right thing. And Mike, you had a couple of really great local examples of folks who are kind of doing marketing the right way on a wide variety of marketing budgets. Why don't you go through some of those examples, and we'll ask Kevin and Jeanette to chime in as well as we go through those.
Sure. Well, there are hundreds of companies and organizations in our community that are doing the right thing and could just as easily be examples, but I just picked three that I wanted to share a few thoughts about. One is Daytona, Dodge, Chrysler, Jeep, Ram, and I think Alfa Romeo and Maserati too. They, as a car dealer, you know, we all have our own perceptions of what car dealer operations are all about and how they work. I think that what they're doing and what some of these other companies are doing, they're focusing on communication, which is very important. They want to communicate with their customers, even with their suppliers, who certainly are influential individuals or companies that can have an effect on a company. Want to communicate with community leaders in terms of what they're doing, and with influencers, people whose opinions are highly regarded. I think it all boils down to the fact that our brands, whatever our brand is, your brand is perishable. So you need to feature and nurture it, and good communication in these four areas will help do it. And I think Daytona, Dodge, Chrysler, Jeep, Ram, Alfa Romeo, Maserati does it. A couple things that they're doing I wanted to share with you. If you do go to their website, you'll see a video of Randy Dye. He's not selling a thing. All he's doing is talking about how the dealership is protecting its employees and its customers. Photograph on the right shows one of his staff members disinfecting a car. I think the interesting thing is that he's got his staff people keeping the cars clean and sterile, but he also has a contract disinfecting company that comes in and sprays the cars every so often. And I think this demonstrates really doing the right thing and actually going a little bit above and beyond that by having an outside contractor come and repeat the process with more sophisticated equipment. So hats off to Daytona Dodge. If we look at the next slide, the one thing about social media is we can all afford full color printing on social media because there's no printing. So Daytona Dodge produces a newsletter. They stick pretty closely to a monthly schedule. And the newsletter is written in such a way that it addresses customers, it addresses suppliers. It's interesting reading to community leaders and to people of influence. So I applaud them for keeping their monthly newsletter up and in circulation. And of course, the last edition and the one that comes out this week is dealing with COVID-19 related issues and how the dealership is maintaining safety and making it a safe, reliable place to come and shop for a car if you so choose. And if you want to buy a car without entering the dealership, they have ways to help you do that as well. I wanted to show this slide because it helps illustrate the fact that Daytona Dodge and other dealerships band together to promote themselves on a unified basis under the banner of the Daytona Auto Mall. So there are public service messages that go out under the banner of Daytona Auto Mall that they all contribute to. And this slide also reminds me that each of us, each company, each organization usually has access to a trade association of some kind. And the trade association can be a great resource in terms of information, messaging, what's happening in their industry. And of course, don't forget about chambers of commerce, which remain on duty through this kind of a crisis and have an amazing amount of resource available. So that's some place where you can go just to get ideas. I think the next slide, yes, the next slide illustrates one of the tangible things that Daytona Dodge is doing. They're offering that if you do buy a vehicle, you don't have to make any payments for 90 days. I've seen some other dealers do similar things. I saw one dealer that said, I think they said, no payments for 2 months, and we will make your payment for 2 months. So that's like a 4-month forbearance of sorts. So this is something where the dealership is offering genuine value to its customers.
And also online car buying.
Online car buying. Yes.
You'll see that up in the header there. Buy your car online, easy purchase online. And of course, a number of manufacturers and dealers are doing this as well.
Right. And I've noticed that even some of the service departments will come and pick up your vehicle. And I thought, what a great service during a time like this, you know, when you might be hesitant to go into a service facility. Let's take a look at what the News Journal is doing, because I think their response to the crisis may be the most muscular of the examples that I have. Several things I wanted to mention. One is they have rebranded their sales department as Local IQ, putting the emphasis on local business, small business, and so forth. I thought that was a good idea. I think it was probably in the works for months before all of this, but what a great time to roll out a local perspective for their sales department. Then they also introduced the customer assistance program. And I can't imagine that this was prepared months ahead of time. This must have been prepared, you know, in the wee hours of the morning as this COVID-19 crisis took shape, I think their customer assistance program is really something to look at. They offered small businesses the chance to run 2 free ads in the News Journal, which, you know, at $100 a square inch or so is a genuine value. They also offered small businesses thousands of online ads for free, and other services as well. So I think that their customer assistance program has been a great success. If you noticed in the News Journal 2 Sundays ago, there were dozens of ads that looked just like this. They were probably, what is that, 2 columns wide, 3 columns wide by about 5 inches tall. There were dozens of ads like that. And now we know that these were all free ads that they offered to small businesses to help them keep their name out there during this crisis. So I thought that was a pretty heroic thing for them to do. And then they also participated with Verizon, which has a national program, a pay it forward program. So they helped contribute to that, because this program then makes $10,000 grants to small businesses across the nation. So, you know, hopefully some of our businesses would be beneficiaries of that generosity. And they also are very strong in terms of supporting small business and buying local. And they have a message here that says, you know, whenever possible, do buy local. It makes a huge difference. And if you can't get into to shop and browse and so forth, certainly gift cards can be purchased online or delivered, and that's another way to support local businesses, which also supports their new theme of local IQ for their sales force.
Mike, let me jump in here real quick, because I just want to emphasize, and I think most of the people that are watching this know this, but buy local is a cornerstone of not only the Daytona Regional Chamber of Commerce, but I think chambers all across our area, the state, the country. The chambers of commerce are made up primarily 80 to 85%, depending on the chamber, of small business, and those are the local businesses. And one of the messages that had been kind of circulating, particularly in the first couple of weeks of the pandemic, was, you know, supporting small business and supporting locally owned business is more critical now than ever, because those are the organizations that they support your Rotary Club, they support your youth sports teams. They're the ones that are really invested in the community, and they do it most times very altruistically. They're not in it for the exposure. They don't look at the marketing value of sponsoring a youth soccer team. They're doing it because they want the youth in the community to have a great place to grow up and live. And so one of the messages that I saw floating amongst chamber professionals was, these are the businesses that have always been there for you every time you've asked, and now they're asking, and it's time for those of us in the community to answer the call. And I think this buy local message really reinforces that.
I think that's a great point. And I know over the years, anytime I've gone to small businesses and ask a hotel to give a free weekend stay, or ask a business to underwrite a $25 gift certificate for a Teacher of the Year finalist, that sort of thing, I can't remember ever being told no. So it is the small businesses who step up. As long as your ask is reasonable, they'll do whatever they can to help the community. News Journal also is helping restaurants. They have a free listing where you can list your restaurant if it's offering curbside or delivery services. And then they promote that website so that consumers can go to the website and find out which restaurants are offering that service. If you want to up the game a little bit, you can actually buy an ad, which gives you a little bit more exposure on the site. $49 a week, I think, is very affordable. So I thought this was another very clever way that the News Journal was helping restaurants, which of course we've got hundreds of restaurants in town, and we'd like to make sure we've still got hundreds of them 30 days from now. Another thing that the News Journal is doing is running ads like this, where they talk about places where you can find a job. So if I'm looking for a job, I can look and see which companies are hiring and what kind of positions that they have. And this is something that they do for free. So it's something that helps the companies find candidates and something that helps candidates find jobs. So I think this is a very much an on-point service that they're providing to the community. And again, nobody's paying for this. It's a freebie. And then the other thing that I wanted to mention relative to the News Journal and all media is if you have news, even during the pandemic, share the news. If there's a promotion, if you win an award, if you achieve a milestone of one sort or another, take a moment and write a quick press release or send a paragraph into the News Journal, and you might get a little bit of coverage, and this kind of thing adds vitality to your business, to the business community. And it keeps people coming back to read the News Journal too. And the last business that I visited to find out how they were surviving was IRA Shoe Repair, which is just a small family business located in Ormond Beach. It's in the Rivergate Shopping Center, corner of Granada Boulevard and Nova Road. Third generation shoe repair shop, great quality work, no marketing budget to speak of. So while they were closed for a while, they're open now, and things that they're doing to help promote their business include being on the internet. This is a picture of Ira Freeman himself. He's the second generation. His father started the business and Ira took over years ago. So this is a photograph of Ira doing his thing, repairing shoes. And then they do promote themselves on social media, particularly Facebook, which is a good medium for them. A lot of their customers follow them on Facebook. And they can do all kinds of things on social media, not only promoting the business in general. This is a picture of Brian Freeman, the third generation. He's the one who'll be taking over the business. So Facebook is very important to them. It also gives them an opportunity to attach related media to their website. As I was sharing with my colleagues yesterday, this is instructions on how to tie your shoes in a creative format. So even though it's not technically shoe repair, it's shoe related, it's entertaining, and it adds a little beef and life and currency to their website. So as I said, Ira's Shoe Repair doesn't have a big budget for marketing, and they can't really afford to buy their way out of this crisis, but they can certainly make their Facebook page more interesting, more attractive, keep people coming back to it. I did want to point out the fact that even a shop like IRA Shoe Repair has a trade association. This is the Shoe Service Institute of America, and Ira's shop is a member of that. And Ira tells me that he's visited that shop or that trade association website from time to time and talk to their officials about what other shops are doing, how they're faring, you know, how many shops they may lose during this crisis, all kinds of information to make sure that Ira's shop is one of the survivors, which I'm sure it will be. And then I love this that I saw out in front of Ira's shop. It's just a typical sandwich board. It takes advantage of the traffic, the foot traffic at this particular plaza, which is not a big plaza, but it has a dry cleaner, a health food store, a vaping shop, a thrift store, a bagel store, a diner. So there's a pretty fair amount of foot traffic and people driving by his store. And I think having his sandwich sign out front not only tells people that they're open, but that they do more than repair shoes and boots. So, you know, if all of us bring our purses and jackets and baseball gloves and other things to Ira's shop, it could double or triple his business, and he hasn't had to spend any money on advertising. One other thing that he did that I think is very clever, he's been doing this for years. If you look in the photo in the background, there is a portable shoe shine stand. And every now and then there'll be somebody out front offering shoe shines. He has taken the shoe shine stand to Ocean Center, for example, during conventions. And as many of us know, particularly older folks, there's no place in town to get your shoes shined unless you drop them off at Ira's, or if he happens to be out front doing shoe shines. That's a great service, very creative and very valuable. So those are just examples from 3 local businesses, and sometimes those ideas can stimulate other ideas. So hopefully you found those entertaining, or maybe even useful. The bottom line is we want to be there for our customers, be there for our clients, and I think these 3 businesses are doing that.
Being there and communicating, that's such an important part of it. As we were planning this, we were talking, especially in the conversation we had relative to examining your messaging. I can recall the first couple of days of the outbreak, started getting emails from companies I've done business with locally and nationally to let me know what they were doing. By the end of about day 5, I had received probably 80 or 100 emails from every company I've ever done business with to let them know what we're doing. So it's so critical to be aware and how quickly that can change. For those of you who are watching, our panelists did wish to share their email contact information. If you have follow-up questions after this, they've all offered to be available to reach out and communicate with. So I would encourage you to leverage that. For our panel, we did have a couple of questions come in on the chat, so we'll get to those. And if you are listening or watching with us and you've got others, please feel free to ask additional questions, and we'll get to as many as we can. The first question has to deal with kind of messaging and the different platforms on which you can message. So it's, how does traditional marketing style and content for your brand differ from social media messaging, or does it? Kevin, why don't you lead off, and then we'll work our way around the panel.
Sure. Yeah, I saw that question pop up, and there's a few different things to consider here, and one is that the different platforms themselves impose certain restrictions and limitations, and what the first thing you should really do is consider how well does your brand even fit in that particular environment or that platform. But again, because on the social side, each of those popular platforms, and we know all the major ones, they do allow for customization. So if you shouldn't look at it immediately and say, well, my brand identity doesn't fit well into that platform, because you can obviously adjust it with graphics and visuals and colors to fit sort of your brand Bible guidelines that you follow. But as far as the message goes, what you really need to look, the next step is to consider the audience there. It may be that your product, your business only appeals to a certain segment of the population. So and fortunately, these platforms all provide ample information, data on the demographics of who's on those platforms in terms of age and interest. So make sure that you fit there as well. But you should be able to stay true to your brand and tailor your message into those different platforms. So short answer is I don't really think the messaging should differ across platforms. That's kind of one of the things that you want to avoid in maintaining the integrity of your brand. But then again, if a particular platform is speaking to a younger audience, then you might need to adjust your messaging if you normally speak to an older audience.
Jeanette, what are your thoughts?
Well, I was just thinking, in fact, that's kind of marketing and communications 101, is that you want to make sure that your messaging and your branding that we talked about back at the beginning are consistent across all platforms. You can tweak them a little bit, and who your audience is very important. But you should, that's your audience is the first thing you take into consideration with the message. Where are they now? Where do we want to move them? And so that's already part of your planning. But but being consistent, otherwise you lose the power of your branding if you're not consistent with it,
Right.
with the images and with the messaging. What we're talking about being different is there are just a few things to consider if you had a big campaign planned before the pandemic, just looking at that again to see if it's still appropriate or how you can make it more powerful by adapting it to the circumstances, but still being consistent with who you are, what you stand for, what you're offering, and so the consistency still needs to be there.
Another
Mike,
thing
your
I'd
thoughts?
like to add, if I may, one is, the question was traditional media versus social media. Just be very mindful that on social media, you really need to be concise. I think our attention spans are much different in a printed world than on the internet.
Sure.
Got to get your point across very quickly. Even if you have a long message, just make sure that the first couple sentences or the first paragraph gets the essence of your message across. The other thing that I wanted to mention is during a time like this, when we maybe have a little more time at our desk than normal, it's a great time to refine your lists or create lists. And these days, if your list can include U.S. postal mailing addresses, email addresses, cell phone numbers, then you've got the world pretty well covered, so that you can do actual postal mail, which, when was the last time you got a personal letter? You talk about impact, or social media, or texting, individual texting, or peer-to-peer texting, if you've got a nice bank of cell phone numbers.
Agreed. When you were talking about the attention span, I had the opportunity to participate in a webinar with the Florida Association of Chamber Professionals yesterday, and they had an hour with Sherry Ann Kelly, who is currently president and CEO of the Association of Chamber of Commerce Executives. So it's our national organization, and she was sharing some information that the goldfish has an attention span. And speaking of the animal, not the cracker, the goldfish has an attention span of 9 seconds. And she had seen data recently that suggested that the average human has an attention span of 8 seconds. So I don't know if this is a case of where we are now beating the goldfish, or we should be ashamed that we don't have the attention span of a goldfish, but I thought that was really insightful. Another question that came in through the chat, one of our participants, Adrian Barker, is curious about email marketing and how effective it might be when it feels very cluttered now. We were just talking about all of the CEO messages that we've been receiving in the last few weeks. So, right. Jeanette, why don't you lead off on that one?
As you know, it's funny with all the time we all have now, that I don't think that attention span has improved any. In fact, it may have gone down because, as we said, people are inundated with emails. I certainly am, and that's the feedback I get from everyone. And the emails, you have to get past the subject. You have to get people to get past the subject line before they even delete it. If you are on social media, or there is a way you can drive people to your website, and that should, if your website has great content, something that drives people to your website is a big help, because that can be brief and to the point. You give them a hook and get them on there. But I'm looking at social media that's well done, that is fairly brief, to the point, entertaining, often visual, which is important. And right now, we need something to pull us in, and I don't see email marketing, for the most part, really pulling that in. And I'm really getting annoyed with the fundraisers who are sending me email marketing. And I mean things like alumni associations and folks who They're not even trying to raise money to feed school children without school lunches. They just want me to contribute to their endowment. So that's more of a personal thing. Certainly don't have immediate research on whether email marketing is any more effective during a pandemic than it has been.
Mike, what are your thoughts on that?
I think email marketing is it's a very useful tool, but I think that the number one rule is relevance.
Yeah.
I mean, if you're not relevant to the situation, to what you're trying to get across, you're going to lose them. And then the other thing is format. And for me, I like especially using Constant Contact or one of those similar services so that the message is right there. And that way the viewer can pitch it or read it without being totally annoyed. And the way it's formatted in a Constant Contact, I think is critical. You just can't require the viewer to have to be navigating around, even if it's just a one-page thing. He or she has to get the message in an instant.
Okay. Kevin?
Yeah, like most marketing disciplines, email marketing is both art and science. But in terms of its effectiveness, obviously your message has to be on point, but a lot of the effectiveness comes down to the quality of your lists. If you don't have much of a list or your list is terrible, then it's obviously not going to be very effective. But dealing in the tourism sector primarily, there's a group called Destination Analysts that's been doing weekly surveys, and for our clients, it's been very, very helpful. This number is now 2 weeks old, but 2 weeks ago, in doing their surveying of tourism marketing, email marketing was up 1,000% since the virus crisis started. So effective or not, that's where a lot of marketers have obviously shifted their attention and resources, which goes back to what we were saying about retooling your marketing budget. Email marketing can be very cost effective too. But for instance, if you had money tied up in radio advertising, it might make sense to shift it from radio to email marketing. Again, if you have good lists to work with, since so many of our cars are just sitting in the garage or the driveway, nobody's going anywhere. There are fewer people behind the wheel, presumably listening to the radio.
Well, I thank you all for the time that you put into this. I know you spent the better part of a week or 10 days developing the content to be able to share with folks. And I think it's critical and maybe one of those things that's not the forefront for a business owner. I think we're frequently so busy in the business, doing the day-to-day, working on customer fulfillment and delivery. And so to be able to provide them this kind of content was, I think, fabulous. So thank you to all of you for the work you did in putting this together. It is greatly appreciated.
Happy to do it.
Glad to do it.
We appreciate those who signed up for the seminar. We're flattered. And Ken, thanks for all your help.
Absolutely. Well, we thank everybody for taking part in the program today. As we mentioned early on, this will be shared via recording on our Daytona Regional Chamber of Commerce YouTube channel, as well as our COVID-19 resource page. So you'll be able to go back and listen and catch anything you might have missed. Thank you all for tuning in. We appreciate your ongoing support of the Daytona Regional Chamber of Commerce. We look forward to seeing you all again